It is 4 o'clock. It is time for this week's session in the Got-IT Talks. With me today, I am fortunate enough to have another, distinguished expert, I might say. Allow me to use that phrase, Orkan, this week. Orkan Okan, a very experienced researcher in the field of health literacy and also in digital literacy as well. But Orkan, while you've been experienced in in research in this field, this is of course your first time to the Got-IT Talks. So what we normally do is that we allow the expert or the guest to introduce him or herself and explain a little bit, I mean, your journey into this field of digital literacy and digital tools. How did that come about?
Oh, yes, I can explain that, Lars. First of all, thanks for inviting me to the Got It Talk. Really, it's my first time here, and I heard a lot of it, and now I'm happy to be part of it. The journey, yes. Usually, I would start with the academic journey leading me to where I am. Exactly, this is health literacy research. When it comes to digital literacy, digital tools, media literacy, and this kind of stuff, I have to go way more in the past because I had a life before the academic life, and I am a software developer, application developer. This is what I first trained in for a couple of years. So attended a school at Siemens in Germany. That was
You've been
back in
hiding, you've been hiding that well, Orkan.
Yeah,
It's
it's
my
I mentioned it back in the days. I was mentioning it all the time, but then we discussed, what has this got to do with what you're doing now? Maybe it's not so necessary, but this is where I came from. Of course, I worked in that specific field on what I learned on programming, network administration, and this kind of stuff. But pretty quick after I started that job and the internet came up and everything got digitalized, digital transformation began, computers began conquering the living rooms and later on the pockets with the smartphones, which are practically computers. It was also necessary to teach people about using these tools. And so I started teaching digital literacy and media literacy. But as I said, that was way long before I started my academic journey. My academic journey then started in relation to that because I began teaching and I developed a kind of enjoyment, fun doing that. I really found, wow, this is great. Teaching is even better at that than what I'm doing with computers. And so I went to university and did a teacher training for almost 4 years at University of Duisburg-Essen. That's a joint university located in 2 cities in North Rhine-Westphalia, Duisburg and Essen. And I was located at the campus in Essen. Yeah, and then I made my degree, educational state exam. This is the first educational state exam that you receive upon successfully accomplishing all the, today you would say credit points. Back then it was a different system. And then I was on the verge of going either to the school and do the second educational exam, or I go to university. And during I was studying, doing the teacher training, I think it was in my second or in the third year, I started working as a research assistant for a professor back at University Duisburg-Essen. And after a couple of weeks being there, health literacy came up to become a topic of that particular working group of that professor. And so we began working on that topic. We developed a proposal for one of the federal funding agencies because they had a call on health promotion and prevention. And back then, we thought, yeah, it could be a topic, maybe with a focus on children and adolescents. And so with a large and diverse group across Germany, A proposal was developed, submitted. It was granted after it took some time, but then eventually it was granted. And by that time, I received my degree, and then I was on the verge. So should I go work in science, or should I go work in practice? And I have decided to work in science because in that time, during that time where I engaged with health literacy, I really saw some relation to what I was doing before, and also found it very interesting and important to work on. And then when I had to make the decision, the professor also switched the university. From Duisburg Essen, he moved to University, Bielefeld University, which is where I started working for many years then on health literacy in that specific research consortium, which is still existing. I'm still working on it. It's the Health Literacy in Childhood and Adolescence Research Consortium. It launched in 2015 across many different cities and academic institutions in Germany, and we are due to Corona. Of course, we extended the funding, the runtime of the project, and now we will still continue until the end of 2023. So at the end, we will have done 8 years of research in that research consortia. And there we have like more than 20 projects on different aspects on health literacy, including the general concept of health literacy, mental health literacy, and also digital health literacy. And in all these projects, of course, we look on children, adolescents, schools, either directly or through proxies, depending on our research focus and question we have in each of these projects. Yeah, and during that time here in Bielefeld, because I'm still sitting in Bielefeld, although I'm now at Munich University, I did my PhD study on the topic of health literacy and children, received my PhD almost 2 years ago, and now just 3 weeks ago, I started my new position at Technical University of Munich, where I was appointed professor of health literacy, and of course, I'm having a focus on children's health literacy, adolescents' health literacy in schools, and these kind of topics. So
What a
this is,
journey.
yeah, this is the journey. Yeah.
But especially, I mean, with focus today talking about digital literacy, then you might say in a way that you've come full circle from developing the stuff to now studying the effects of it. And I think, of course, that's also what we will be diving in a little bit more today in various ways in our talk today. And your 20 projects on literacy in
22 actually, yeah.
22 indeed. That's of course covering a lot of ground. I guess I mean they're all connected to the fact that we want to find better ways of navigating, of educating, of disseminating certain skills to other people. But across these 22, what's your main focus? I mean, the side where you're helping children to become better citizens, the key driver for you is just the element of getting science better across, or what really drives your motivation again across, I mean, 22 research projects?
But I have to say, in the HLCA Research Consortium, we are more than 40 researchers. It's a very diverse interdisciplinary group, and everyone there has their own project, kinda. So you have some certain projects you work in, and then there are the people back in 2013, 14, and I was one of them who were developing the first ideas of the first funding stage. Now we are moved on to the second funding stage, using the research findings of the first funding stage to develop a new focus, etc. And so I'm not working on all these projects, but I have a focus on certain projects. And in the first funding period, this was on developing conceptual understandings, measurement tools, doing measurements, and also contributing to some of the other projects. But I was also, or I am still, the project manager coordinator of the consortia. And so in that function, I was able to see into the work of the others and learn from them, see what they're doing, interact with them, interchange ideas, etc. But the focus that I had, as I said, conceptually, methodologically based on focusing on measurement tools, and that was the first funding period. But then the focus in the second funding period is now on health literacy policies and how they
Mm.
address children and adolescents. I mean, there are a couple of policies available, not only in Germany, but in many countries and many regions. And one of the research questions of my project is how are they considering children and adolescents? What kind of concepts do they suggest? How to apply them, when to apply them, etc. These kind of things. And the aim is to develop a set of guidelines because in the near future, many such policies will be developed in not only here in Western as in European countries, but also in other regions of the world. And what can we learn from existing policies, and how can we improve future policies to make sure that children's and adolescents' health literacy, or let's say also health literacy in the education sector and schools, is considered adequately the way it deserves to be considered. Because when you look at adult health literacy research, or many of the policies, they all say, yes, health literacy is important, and we have to start early with the strengthening and promotion of it. And so if you take that statement seriously, of course, we have to look on a point early in the life course, also not only personal point in the life course, but also the institutional point in the life course. So when children start going to school.
That phrase of yours, if we take that seriously, um, is it something that we often, I mean, it's a very collective we, and I'm not talking about the two of us, but is it something that we as a culture, you think that we actually take seriously?
Uh, it depends. It depends. For many years, I thought we are not, because as I said, the policies, they say you have to start early. Education is important, but often it was only once. I mean, I'm talking about back in the days, right? I'm not talking about the latest developments. I'm talking about when I started, and there were policies out there, and they were saying it's important. It's education sector, very important. Children, you can address it in children, and sometimes or often that was not reflected when, for example, funding agencies on the local, national, or the European level published their grant application announcement. So that was not reflected well. And when at the same time, when you were reading articles, at the end they were saying the same. We need more research, especially how health literacy develops. And of course, then we have to look on children and adolescents, but not much was happening. So not much was happening. So, but there is a culture of change, and this has also impacted that field of science. And now there is a change. Many researchers in many countries and regions across the world, great colleagues, some of whom I know, others I only know from when I read their research papers, and really they're everywhere in the world. They do great research on health literacy of children and adolescents, health literacy in schools as well. And the other side of the coin, the policy development, almost all the policies that have been developed since then, have been published since then, they have a huge focus on that area. So they have a huge focus. But then that's having the science, having the policies, but then we have to look on the practice, the practical settings, the everyday life settings, and how do we set health literacy in motion in these fields for my particular target groups and settings.
Well, as you say, things were different at one point, and especially it might not be connected to what I'm about to ask you about, but there's a particular phenomenon we've been living with for a couple of years. Has that, you think, been part of that change that we're seeing now, or is that evolution that you're talking about? Would that have happened regardless of I mean, there has been a huge need for digital literacy, an increased need for digital literacy in the last couple of years. But would that research emphasis, or maybe that policy um, revisiting that's been going on, would that have happened regardless, you think?
Yeah, I mean, change is a characteristic of life, and so of course there is an evolution steadily ongoing. And from what I can see, when the digital literacy movement started, it was a how you say, not a side topic, but something that was on the horizon, and you could see, like when the sun in the dawn, you
Mm.
could see that um, it is growing, it's growing, it's
Mm.
growing, and now today it is everywhere. So digitalization, transformation, um, have the society, hold the society, are an essential part of society. And digitalization is necessary to every sector of society and to almost every area, any area of life. So I can say there is an evolution, but it has just started, and we will see where it leads us. I mean, it's not only digital literacy we are talking about, or how digital we are interacting with digital technology or using it for communication, etc. We have
Mm.
developments such as artificial intelligence. Yeah, we have developments such as self-driving cars, and even the space race that we had back in the last century has a new face now. The kind of we use technology, and who is using technology to go to space besides NASA and the European Space Administration, the Russian, the Chinese. There are almost also now private entities investing in that. So we can see how it is changing everything in society, not only health. And it's not only digital literacy, but it's the total digital transformation.
Would you then consider, without necessarily diving, I mean, it's a topic that we talk about every day, so sometimes one can grow tired of it, I suppose. But would you think then the pandemic, that there has been a challenge in terms of extending your research, or has it been a benefit because there's suddenly been more emphasis, or more like business as usual, just different topics? How have you seen it affect your I guess work life, mostly your
Yeah,
academic life?
yeah. Of course, the pandemic
Well,
has had an
yeah.
impact on everybody's life, and of course also on my academic life. Many things have changed. First and foremost, modus operandi of how I work now. I work, of course,
Mhm.
like you as well. Everybody, of course, probably more than
Mm.
before.
Mm.
But things are also easier now because these kind of virtual meetings that we are having right at the moment, they became a part of my everyday work life. So before it was like you had these sometimes every other week, sometimes only once in a month, but you would always have to you would always try to have a physical meeting, and you would travel somewhere to have the meeting, and sometimes you would only travel for there to have a meeting for 2 hours and then come back. So in terms of sustainability and climate, when they do all the traveling, and you kind of a footprint you leave behind. So these things changed. Also conferences. I would have never imagined that I could attend a conference from my working place, from just using the computer and being at a conference, speaking about how digital transformation impacted us. This is something I
Mm.
have not mentioned, but of course, you see, this is something that has changed. So that's the modus operandi
Mm.
of how I am working. That's the one change. The other change, I would look from the perspective of health literacy. Before COVID-19, um, I had to explain what not what health literacy is. Of course, what health literacy is, you always have to explain. But I also had to explain why health literacy is important. I had to explain it. But since the outbreak of COVID-19, I can just point my finger to it and can say, you see that? This is the reason why health literacy is important. And also, the COVID pandemic has a digital dimension. Yeah, not how the virus travels, but how information and communication about the virus are traveling. This is embedded in the digital dimension of COVID-19, and I mean, I'm sure that everybody remembers back in December last year, there came word of there is a new virus, and we heard it before with MERS virus, with the other SARS-CoV virus a couple of years before, 15 years before, etc., etc. We heard that, and it was, yeah, it is there, but it's far away, and it won't come here. And then came January, and there were first cases in other countries outside where it was first reported, etc., etc. And all these communication and information came through digital communication channels. And then when
Mhm.
COVID was everywhere, information on COVID was everywhere. At WHO, they called this phenomenon the information epidemic, meaning infodemic, meaning that the information on COVID-19 is traveling faster than the virus. And what you will find on all digital channels is accurate and not so accurate information on COVID-19, but by the end of the day, making information environments and the whole digital realm more complex, more
Mm.
difficult to navigate, to find the right information that you need to inform your behavior and your action. And when we are talking about that, this is what you need health literacy or digital health literacy for. So
Mhm.
it helps you navigate these realms and manage information on health. So I think these are the two main changes.
One thing that I would like to ask your opinion on. I've found it. I mean, um, traditionally, one might say with health literacy that it was often closely related to educational level or social strata or things like that. Often, not only, but that it was. I mean, we are two men. It was often also linked to gender. So there could be different things. But a funny thing I think I've experienced that digital literacy has slightly different characteristics in the sense that both the speed of digitalization and I guess um, the experience of using digital tools or being comfortable with it has some different characteristic to it. You can see professors, highly qualified professors with a strong health literacy, suddenly challenged by digital tools, or you can see sort of a different way of how digital literacy strikes at these different normal groups. I've been mentioning, for instance, the healthcare professionals, the doctors, the nurses as well, because they've been really been challenged by a lot of new digital tools and therefore also on their digital literacy. Um, do you also see this sort of as a is it just a different statistics or is it fundamentally a different element to the two fields?
I mean, it is integral, but it's also fundamentally something new, as you said.
Mhm.
Um, being health literate, so being able to manage health information is the one thing. But then on top comes when digital technology, software, apps, other forms of digital tools come into play. So that's a different dimension. So you need also the skills to be able to master the challenges surrounding these new technologies. And this is something you have to learn. I mean, it's that we have this lifelong learning. And I said, I used the phrase of taking something seriously before in our talk now, but this is also something we have to take seriously, only because somebody has earned a degree, received a position, and whatsoever position that might be, you never must stop learning. And this digital transformation is proof for that, because there was a world before that, and now it's a different world. I mean, many of the things that were relevant before and that you needed before, they are still relevant. You still need them. But on top of that, there is something new, and you have to adapt to it. And
Mm.
I remember back in the very, very early studies that I read from the 1990s on health literacy. So the 10 years, the first 15 years, there were many surveys on adult literacy, adult health literacy. And they, for example, often found that you have groups with high academic achievement, high educational levels, even from high income households, and they had good literacy levels, but they lacked competencies in health literacy. So that was back then. So showing that
Mhm.
only the reason only being literate doesn't necessarily mean you are also health literate, and being health literate doesn't necessarily mean you are digitally literate. And I think that your background, is of course is important. It can be a resource, can also be an asset, but also a risk factor depending on what study results you look at. But you have to not assume that only because you can do one thing, you can also do the other thing. There are transferable skills, of course, and I consider myself being part of the TV generation and Commodore 64. I don't know if you remember that. That was one of the very earliest home computers. So I socialized with Atari 2600. I remember these things in the early 80s. So they came and they came to stay, and they have evolved. And now I have, as I said, I have a little computer in my pocket. But
I,
it is difficult. Anyway, it is anyway
mm,
difficult.
yes, I can testify to knowing what a Commodore 64 is. I had
Great.
a I had a Dragon 32, which was so, but few people, I suppose, younger than, well, let's not go into that. But anyway, as actually a question though, I mean, the difference here between literacy, health literacy, digital literacy is also, maybe also in a way a difference between different professions, maybe, or different fields meeting. In traditional literacy, we have, if you will, authors of various fields that are trying to use a very well-known media that we know. In health literacy, it would be often healthcare professionals using, of course, certain media to share their knowledge in different ways. But in digital literacy, we also have actually digital developers, not necessarily you yourself, but there's also a matter of different professions here. Some of our earlier experts on the Got-IT talks, for instance, have looked at, I mean, a factor in some of the challenges of digital literacy is also that some of those software developers are not necessarily very, it's not a critique per se, it's just an observation that they're not very well trained as anthropologists, for instance. That is not their specialty. Not that necessarily you would say that doctors or nurses would be that, but still, is there also, I mean, a difference because we have, if we had literacy has been around for a couple of more years, hundreds of years. That it's also a matter of these. It's because it's new that the people that are creating these tools are creating some because they can, but it's a challenge because they have a mindset, and they are trying to build something that has to be understood by people with another mindset. Is this also an element? And maybe if that would be a yes, it might be a rhetorical question here. Is that also why it is so important to build interdisciplinary teams for this development?
Yeah, Lars, you took the word out of my mouth. So I
Sorry.
I would have said that this is stressing that this is an element. So it stresses, yes, it's an element, and this is also the reason why we need interdisciplinarity. So I would not assume a software developer to also be a anthropologist, a sociologist, a psychologist, but I would expect that we work together, because health is interdisciplinary, and digitalization and transformation, they highlight the need for this kind of interdisciplinarity. And we need all these perspectives. This is an all hands job. It's what I always say, that we have to work all together. That's the one pillar, one of the foundational aspects. The other one is user experience and user involvement, because we're doing that work all theoretically, mostly theoretically. Of course, now we do our research, etc., but we do it in our academic spheres. And even if we act interdisciplinary with a team of people from all different kind of professions, at the end of the day, we have to meet the need and the demands of the citizens, of the people, and their experience is what we need. And this is the reason why we need to involve them as well into these interdisciplinary teams, because this is what interdisciplinarity is all about.
What would then be your um, key advice? I mean, thinking of some of your, I don't know, old colleagues, maybe. Some of your key advice on that user involvement is probably not just to go out and grab hold of the first person you meet, but some key advice on user involvement. What would you suggest or have people bear in mind?
Yeah, that when we develop research, let it be research projects, proposals whatsoever, or when we develop measures, interventions, etc., for practical use, one essential step is to keep in mind that we have to include the target group our research or our intervention or the policy is addressing. So I would say that this should be the first step. So like kind of being part of the mindset. And the other
Mhm.
thing is, of course, you don't just go out and on the street and then you pick the first person. I mean, you can do that. Maybe you can generate valuable insights. But of course, when you, for example, develop an intervention, and let's say, or you develop two interventions, one for secondary school age children, 16, 17 years old, and one for younger children, maybe in the primary school. So of course, these two different target groups, age groups also, are different from each other. One of which is on a more earlier period in the life course. The other one is on a later, with different experiences, at different cognitive, social, emotional development. And so if I want to develop an effective intervention for either of these groups, I have to include them, because the intervention will eventually look different for either of these groups. So it cannot be one intervention that I can use in both these groups. And so it's not about grabbing someone from the street to ask or to involve, but who is my target group, and then of course include the target group. But these are not new ideas. I mean, participation, etc., is around for many decades now, and people were discussing them as early as in the late 1970s, early 1980s, I guess. But with user experience, user involvement, etc., these kind of things became a co-construction is another concept, another term. They became more and more relevant over the past 10, 15, 20 years. I even saw call for proposals, particularly focusing on components of co-construction or user involvement, not talking anymore about participation, but concretely about these. So.
Hmm. Well, and that is of course really encouraging. Yet from time to time, we do also see things being developed where, I mean, that could be from a private company, but also government agencies that seems to have been developed without ever being tested or tried with actual users until the day one, and then the system crashes. So that's an old story too. Um, for some of those, I mean, involving users, it can be they can have all kinds of ideas. I mean, they can have all kinds of requests. It's a messy thing involving those users. What would you then say to those digital developers out there to encourage them really when they integrate users? I mean, I mean, you probably involving users. They speak a different language and they don't understand all the science and so on. That it's really hard, isn't it? Sometimes. So how do you keep what's the key advice here to keep up the spirit of co-creation?
Yeah, it's difficult to give the key advice because I assume it all depends on the situation and the context. But when we are specifically talking about the case of digital developers and the necessity or making them knowing about the necessity to involve users, I would work with examples from the games industry.
Mm,
Computer games. So there are often computer games that are being released at a certain date, and a lot of announcement and a lot of internet chatter around the most prominent games I'm talking about.
mm,
And
mm,
some of these games got released. Just an example: 1st October release of that and that game. And when selling starts and people buy the game and install it on their computers, they found out, oh, lot, it has so many bugs that it needs a lot of reprogramming to do all the bug fixes. The game even doesn't work. And so this is
mm,
an example I assume that any digital developer is aware of, even if they are not familiar with computer games, even if they are not playing computer games. But this is a phenomenon that is well known. And there are some games that are being released and they work, and then there are some bug fixes in the months to come. But other games, like recently happened with some of the games, they are so full of bugs that they even don't work. And we have to wait for like 6 months and even longer for them to fix the game and make it playable. And this could have been avoided if they would have properly tested the game. And how would have user involvement worked in that case? Yeah, I don't know, beta releases, any other form of releases, and give it to the target groups. Let them play the game and let them tell you, oh, we have found this and this doesn't work, and I feel uncomfortable with that aspect, or we could make some modifications here. And I think it's the same with when we look on interventions on health literacy. That's kind of work by using digital tools. And of course, we involve the necessary target group, and we learn. We learn
mm,
from when they're using when they're using it, or even when we are developing it, how they think about it. And I think this is something that we could use for digital developers, for other groups. We have to seek for other examples, other methods, but the underlying concept is the same. The underlying concept is the same. It
mm,
doesn't work without them, and we have to make people aware of the necessary user, that user involvement is necessary, is required. And as you
Would you think?
said, it's messy. Sorry, but this is how you started. You said it's messy, and this is what I'm thinking. Oh my God, user involvement, that will make everything much more complex. Yeah,
Uh, it can certainly, yes. But your example here is very good. I think it wasn't October 2020, suppose there was the launch of a very high profile game, Cyberpunk, that well, it wasn't for me, it was my son.
of
So,
course.
no, it was really my son, but still, but it really failed and crashed, and they've
Yeah,
been using really an enormous amount of money,
yeah.
and whether to say that they were necessarily wasting all their money, that's too soon to tell. Um, but it was definitely not good for the brand value. That's for sure. Um, so you get an increase in quality. But do you think maybe that also for purposes of digital literacy, I mean, when we're talking about apps or for that matter, digital services, some might say, well, these are not games. We're not talking about games. But is it valid to sort of equate the digital experience to the extent that the gaming industry has a lot to learn? The healthcare sector when it comes to good user experience, maybe.
Yeah, I agree. They might say it's not the same, but it's the page in the same book. And so the
Mm.
underlying principle again is the same. For example, many countries now develop or have even developed these health information databases where you as a citizen uh, you can download an app or some kind of other interface you can use to access it, and you know that this is from a health authority, governmental organization in most cases, and this is trustworthy information. So that's a good thing. There is information that's trustworthy. I don't have to keep checking if there are other better informations available. But then again, I'm using that digital tool, and or maybe it's too complex, or it doesn't it's not adapted to how I use um, the technology, where the buttons are on the phone or in the computer, or how the menu looks like. I'm maybe not finding the information, or things within the app or on the platform are not interlinked. It could be useful that if I'm looking for that, I would also have a link to that other topic, or when I'm searching for one topic and get the results, that other results or other links or something else is also displayed there for me to use because it's relevant. Or if it is, I don't know, in the future, if it's linked to patient health records. So, of course, in the keeping in mind data protection and all these kind of stuffs, that there are better ways of how these are interlinked, or how this is, how easy or difficult it is to handle that app, etc. These kind of things, and these kind of things I can learn from asking people, working with people who will later work with that service. And we are talking about the people who are going to use these digital tools and services. But when we go step back, we have the world, and in that world is this digital transformation. But we also have the people who don't use these tools. So, and we won't probably not reach these people by using these tools. And this is another discussion. How can we reach these people who don't use these tools? So we are also talking also always about leaving no one behind. And of course, today's topic is digital literacy, and we are talking about these things, but we have to just to be aware there is a certain amount of people, groups who probably, to whatever reason, might also be very good reasons, do not use these tools. And so
Mm.
it's not the solution. It's not the solution to every problem.
Um, I I don't think necessarily that we need to hide the fact that you and I have been talking a few times before on various topics related to this field. Um, but especially mentioning that, do you think that then, I mean, that this is a lack, either leaving no one behind, that we are failing to educate people on digital literacy in the sense that we should do more, maybe by using different media to educate them? I mean, is it possible to reach a stage where you actually have, well, digital literacy for all?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We talked about this before, and the most prominent example that we are most recently discussing, not only the two of us, but with a wide group of people, we are doing this, is
Mm,
books. And books
mm,
are still very important, are a great medium, and also a great didactical instructional tool. They can be used to promote health literacy, but also to promote digital health literacy, because when I when I did the training that I mentioned before, software developer, many of the work, the learning techniques I used was by using a book. So it was all with a book. There were many aspects, of course, where I had to use the computer for programming, for other kind, for networking, etc. These kind of things. But books are so relevant. Even today, when I prepare teachings, when I prepare research projects, articles, whatsoever. One of the main media I use is still books, because books are important and they have an educational value. And maybe at a certain age, it is yeah, again early in the life course, it might also be the better choice. So favoring print over
mm,
digital. Of course, this changes later on. But I think it is very important to have the diversity of media tools, and a book is also a media tool, of course, and there
mm,
have a diversity, including digital tools and analog tools, and also experiencing. Also, when you go out, so that's another form of learning and making experiences. Yeah, something very practical. Sometimes
mm,
you can combine it with
mm,
digital technology, like we have seen with the most recent intervention a colleague of mine has developed, combining a game, an app, and health literacy and physical activity. So these are things that um, are rather complementary than exclusive.
mm. um, and hence, so if interdisciplinarity is sort of widening the scope, then the well, traditionally multimedia is sort of expanding into a multi-layer approach, I suppose. Um, are we then, in the interest of leaving no one behind, are we on the right track? I mean, I tried exploring your opinion about about how well we were faring when it comes to health literacy, but um, the digitalization is, I mean, we across the world we are still sort of failing in delivering literacy to everyone, and we didn't actually just make everyone health literate yet. um, and digital literacy is not sort of a gift that everyone has yet. But are we on the right track, you think? I mean, it's just a sort of a slow moving train, picking up speed, or would you think that, I mean, you mentioned policies, that the policies is something that you're looking into now. Um, but is it moving in the right direction, or are we seeing sort of pockets of maturity mixed with well, deserts of desperation, or how?
Yeah. Yeah, first of all, of course, I am not, I cannot be the judge of global development in digitalization and digital
Just,
transformation.
just between
But
you and me, Orkan.
yeah, you're right. Just between yeah,
Yeah,
a secret discussion nobody will ever hear
yeah,
and
never,
see
never
about.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I can see that there are some departments we are doing good, on other departments we are not doing well. We could improve, and of course we would need policy support. I can just give you an example from Germany. Let's stay in Germany because this is something I know a bit more than about other areas. Yeah, speaking
Yeah, yeah,
about
great.
practical experience.
Germany is a medium-sized country, one might say. So yes, it's indeed a it's a very good example. Yeah.
Right. So a couple of years ago, the education system became aware that okay, we have to transform it. I mean, physically and also on a meta level. Digitalization is impacting education. And so we
Mm,
need to transform the sector to meet the needs and demands of these processes. And just talking concretely, practically, internet in schools, computers in schools, software, apps, everything needed to digital tools needed in education. And so a policy process began. They developed the policy, the respective ministry that is responsible for this sector, and several the big political program with several different policies, all of which contributing to the overarching goal of equipping the whole education, not only the primary and secondary, but the whole education system, adult education, very early, etc. The whole system for the digital age. And so that's good development. So funding was made available, curricula were made available, investments have been done, teacher training has been changed, or these things, these are processes, they are all still ongoing. So a lot of good things happened. So that's the one thing, the good things that are happening. But then all the funding that is made available, so there is an administrative and organizational perspective to that as well. You cannot just put money on the table and say, so here, this is the money, and from my end, from my policy end, I have solved the problem because we need money to make the investments. Here is the money. So
mm,
you need people to make the right to develop the right concepts, how to invest the money. You need systems, monitoring systems, to know what do schools need, how do we get it to them, and there are many competencies also needed to not only to get that knowledge, to get that technology, to install it there, but also to use it in everyday life, because then you have the pupils, you have the teachers, the school principals, other people involved in the school community, and this digitalization requires a lot of changes and that people adapt, and that has follow-up investment. So I cannot only give the money for them to make the investment in computers, but I would also need the funding to fundamentally change a training, or maybe create new positions in school that are responsible IT specialists, kinda, I don't know, people who know how to use these technology and also make sure that it is used most effectively. It's only one perspective to the whole problem. So we can see on the one hand there are these good developments, and on the other hand there is much room for improvement. Keeping in mind we were talking about the problem of leaving people behind. So
mm,
this whole thing has been also done in order also to consider not to leave anybody behind, but this happens on the way. For example, some schools are better resourced to use that governmental funding to make their school digitally more literate with all the soft and hard tech that is necessary. and probably children who attend that school, they're lucky that the teachers are very digitally literate, equipped to use these technologies. They can use the technology, right? And maybe other schools, they could have the same, but to the reasons I just mentioned, they are not there yet. And
mm,
I would wish for that there are, yeah, systems available that help those schools. So,
mm,
and that we only learned it through experience. So the policies were there. There was last year there was a report end of last year, because of course homeschooling in Germany, because of Corona, the computer, like when we two started to talk, you asked me how it has changed my everyday working schedule, and my the tools that I use. Computer is now the main tool. And so computer also became one of the main tools for schooling, for education. And so there was a report that was related to all these policies, and one of the findings was that there was an amount X available, and only 15% of that amount was already asked for from the schools to make these
mm,
investments we are talking about. So let's say it is 5 billion. Just say it's 5 billion euros that were there, and maybe, like, I don't know, 1,750,000,000 whatsoever have been used. And so,
mm,
and the whole funding is, they made some calculations before, and they said, probably we will need that money for the whole sector to transform. And we have only used a very small amount. And so, of course, we could have not achieved the full transformation if we only have used a tip of the iceberg. And to my understanding, the amount of funding is way too less. So we need much more, because this funding only considers the sole investment in technology, but not all the other investments that are required. And now in this example, you can um, just taken as an example that there is something happening, something is
mm,
happening, and probably everywhere in the world. But sure, in some regions more, in other regions less, and also sure, it needs much more systemic approaches, much more policy support, and funding, of course, and people know how to use this funding, and share it and bring it there, forward it to the areas it is needed most.
mm. Um, in part of your life, you also, as you mentioned, worked as a teacher, um,
Only
and
very short, not
that's
as a.
fine. Still, I'll use it as an example here. Um, I mean, as teachers, the teaching community are often asked to, well, solve a lot of problems in the world. Um, and what you mentioned just before about what we need to teach and requirements of doing all of that, that could for some, I suppose, sound a little bit exhausting. Oh my God, do we need to do all of this? Um, and it costs a lot of money too, and so on. Um, would you? I mean, um, we find some people that that would prefer school to be about training geography, basic math, language skills, and so on. Um, how would you respond to? I mean, they, this digital field that just sounds so enormous. Um, is it really something that the school need to take in place? Because I mean, if they need those digital devices later in life, surely they can learn, can't they? What would you?
Yeah, first I would agree with you with what you said in the beginning of your question. We cannot assume teachers solving or schools solving all the problems of society. And then uh, when we were talking about research, we said interdisciplinarity is fundamental. So, and
Mm,
I believe that the same concept has to apply for the school as well. We cannot have one teacher or one specific subject to incorporate all the needs and requirements that come from this digital change and transformation, but we have to create something new. So
mhm,
if we need someone, something, some teachers, whatsoever, administrators, we have to create these positions. We cannot assume that those who are already there take on top of what they're doing already these new tasks. So,
mm,
so you see, when I said before, yeah, there is this funding available. The government made the funding available, but only to buy the infrastructure. But you need
mm,
the people to use the infrastructure. And as I said, you cannot assume the teachers who are not trained on these things. I mean, of course, some are motivated and they can do
mm,
it, like someone is a good musician and that teacher can always play a song, play the guitar for the children. It adds another
mm,
educational component to what he or she is doing. So, and for the digital sphere, there are, I'm sure, similar teachers out there, especially those who are just started like 10, 15, 20 years ago with digital socialized, probably, or just starting now. But
mm.
there are others, and we need this kind of interdisciplinarity in schools as well, like we need it for health. We need also people who have a focus on health and education, and we need also people with a focus on the whole things that are related to digital transformation and digital education, etc.
That's a very good point. I think, Orkan, and a very good sort of end for our talk today. That we need to use interdisciplinarity at that stage of life and learning as well. Thank you very much for joining the Got It Talks today, and thank you very much for our participants for listening. And I hope to see you and also anyone listening to this or viewing this in further discussions in the future too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lars, for inviting me and that we had the opportunity to discuss this together face to face without slides. That was amazing. Thank you so much.